Today's workshop is Supports and Services for Children of Combined Vision and Hearing Loss and Their Families, an overview of the New England Consortium on Deafblindness, or NEC. I'm excited to introduce to you Tracy Luiselli, Director, Helene Gallagher, the Vermont Education Consultant, Brenda Allair, the Lead Consultant, Educational Consultant, and Kristen Layton Campagna, Senior Consultant, all from the New England Consortium on Deafblindness. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Evans Luiselli, and we're just thrilled to be here with you. And first, want to thank you for taking time out of your very busy days to listen to some information regarding the work that we do in Vermont and our other states. Our goals for this session are to give you a brief overview or synopsis of the population of deafblind children, to give you some information regarding services and supports available to families and providers in Vermont and throughout the New England region, and to give you an idea of some learning strategies for home and in the community. To begin, we want to kind of give you the foundation of our grant and the work that we do. And often people will start off and say, so what is NEC? Tell us, how it might be helpful. We're first and foremost a federal grant funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP. And our goal is to build capacity at the state and local level in Vermont to serve children who are deafblind, and obviously a very low incidence population. We work with children and their teens and families from babies to infants up to the age of 21, in some cases 22. And we serve the states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and of course, Vermont. We want to begin today to really underscore an understanding, if you will, around the term deafblindness. So from our perspective, we like this definition. We find it's really helpful and functional for families and providers. But when we use the term, it really refers to any combined hearing and vision loss that significantly impacts the child's learning and access to information from people in the community around them. Oftentimes, people will hear the term deafblindness and they think about Helen Keller, and they automatically conjure up an image of Helen Keller, a child at that point when she was quite young, couldn't hear and couldn't see, and really had no functional residual vision. When in fact, those children having no vision or hearing, that's really quite rare when we talk about this particular population. And I know here we are in the middle of January, but I thought this might be a really nice image to warm all of us up here today. I thought about a mountain image, but I thought, no, let's go back to the sort of warm summer month. So I took these pictures when I was in Maine in a very hot day in August. So thinking about deafblindness and a child that might be out on a beach with a parent, and when we look out on the beach and we're walking on the beach, we can see off at the distance, we can hear different sounds such as birds or people talking, or the waves kind of coming in and out. We can see off at the distance as the sun is setting. We have an idea of not only what's around us at near, but also at distance. But think about a child who's deafblind. It really is a disability of that distance sense, and an inability at times to bring that distance world closer so the child can really access it and understand what's happening around their immediate world. So the population of children that we're talking about are really quite diverse. In fact, 90% of the children identified as having deafblindness have additional disability. Oftentimes, they have very complex needs, and what we do often see is that hearing and vision loss may not yet be identified or addressed, especially children that have very complex healthcare issues. We often see this in situations where children have brain-based visual impairment or neurological sequelae that really present such severe conditions that people really are quite often focused on life-saving measures. And we see that quite a lot, especially in our younger populations. Now to talk about terminology. And this is important because we see a lot of the children that we work with identified under different categories. And we might hear things like co-occurring sensory loss, deaf plus or deaf plus plus, complex healthcare needs, multiple disabilities, combined vision and hearing loss, or dual sensory loss. I think it's important for folks to understand that all of the federal funding is under the umbrella of deafblind. So we like to really kind of focus on that term. We may sometimes say this is a child who is deafblind and has additional support needs, but this just kind of gives you an idea of all of the different terminology that's used. We also see a lot of children identified under multiple disabilities, and I believe that's problematic because it really doesn't identify that sensory issues or the vision and hearing modalities may be impacted. So we prefer to use the term deafblind. Thinking again about the population and situations that predispose a child or put a child at risk, there are several categories, and those being hereditary syndromes or disorders, premature birth, pre or postnatal infections, trauma, family history, and conditions often associated with CVI or neurological processing issues. We tend to see a lot more children identified on the federal deafblind child count as having CHARGE syndrome. That's kind of an increasing situation or syndrome that we see. Obviously, mitochondrial disorders and peroxisomal disorders, meningitis, and then any kind of trauma to the head, eye, or ear. So really knowing when and where and how that trauma occurred is really important to us when we look at assessment-related services. Now, thinking about, again, the range of the population that we're talking about, I like to use these pictures to give folks an idea, again, of the importance of close proximity for learning. So you can see the child to the top left is actually sitting on the adult's lap and really having to be close to support eye-to-eye contact and visual attention. Where the child down on the bottom left has very little residual vision and hearing, and she uses tactile hand under hand sign language. Again, the child in the middle really has to be up close. The little guy up to in the blue shirt, again, he's using hand under hand sign language. Now the little girl going down the slide, she wears glasses and she does have some good distance vision. So again, representing again the range of the sensory conditions that present with this population. And then the little guy who, again, he's in very close proximity in the ball pit there and having hand-to-hand contact with the adult that's working with them. We like to use this chart to show families and teams kind of the range and where a particular child or student might fall in this range of children who are deafblind. So the top of the chart indicates the classification of vision loss, the left classification of hearing, and then to the far right and on the bottom are gray shaded boxes that relate to neurological processing of visual and auditory information. So you might hear, as it relates to visual processing, terms like cortical or cerebral visual impairment, or auditory neuropathy and central auditory processing disorder. So we can often work with families and teams and actually pinpoint in a specific box to show families and teams where a particular child presents along that range. We wanted to give you just a little bit of a picture of where Vermont is. And I'm sorry this is cut off on the slide a little bit on the bottom, but the Vermont data is the far right. Currently, we have 41 children identified on the federal deafblind child count for Vermont. We look at the early childhood numbers, which are blue and red bars, and we have 7 children. As you look at the gold bar across the board and across our states, you'll see a big jump from early childhood to school age, and then the green bars being transitioned. So we often see as children get into those school years, that's when teams and families tend to struggle the most. and request services and support. So this kind of gives you an overall picture of the population where Vermont stands in relation to the other New England states. A lot of similarities in terms of the population and how these break out by age and such. So as we think about today's session and our purpose, we really hope that we leave you with an understanding of the importance of identification and why it matters. And first and foremost, we believe that understanding the population and the needs of the population and the need for specialized services come first. It's really critical in order to integrate expertise to really target specific outcomes for children. It's also important in order to connect families to families. It allows families and providers to develop appropriate team support geared to the child's individual needs. And it helps providers really align developmental and educational needs. So reporting a child to NEC really is important to allow continued national and state support. This is how your federal dollars in Vermont are aligned, and it allows us to plan for trainings based on the needs for specific children, profiles of children and families in Vermont as well. On our latest family survey, we're actually due for another one coming up here in February. But these are some stories, if you will, that families have told us. These are some items that people have told us are important to them. So I thought it was wonderful that our families could tell us that their child really impacted them as far as becoming a better person, that they've learned from their child, that their child is a source of joy to their family, but that they worry about their child's future. They really enjoy our family weekends, so we're hoping to get some additional grant funding for that. And unfortunately, our families, and this is not related just to the field of deafblindness, but they have a hard time envisioning their child's future. So that really is important for us to take note of. They want to connect with other families. They need some support around behavioral issues at home. They need help with childcare and getting family tasks completed. They need some ideas of how to integrate their child in the community, to work on self-care skills, and to talk to siblings about their child who's deafblind. So that gives you a little picture. It may not seem sort of different to other disability groups that you folks may connect with, but kind of gives us a picture of what really are the priorities around our work and support for families. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda Allair. Take it away, Brenda.
Great, Tracy. And if you wouldn't mind advancing the slides for me, that'd be great. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit today about learning and deafblindness. So Tracy talked about this population of students and how complex they can be, but we also really want to be mindful that all children are able to learn, and with appropriate strategies and supports that children can be successful. So that's kind of going to be the focus for the next little bit here. So we talk a lot about presuming competence and about the ability to learn. And really what this means for us and for families is really that all children are capable of learning. You know, children come into the world as infants with wiring to understand and be curious about their environment. What's different for some of our students and children is the ways in which they have access to that information and the strategies that we use to support them in learning. So, you know, we really want to say that learners who are deafblind aren't limited by what they can learn, even our most complex students, but by how and what we teach them using the strategies that we know are effective. And so that's, again, coming back to this idea that when children are identified appropriately and are receiving appropriate services and supports, then that's where learning can happen. And there's some really important foundations for learning for our deafblind students. Some of these are sort of key for all students, but I think in terms of the children that we're thinking about, we have to be really cognizant that these have to be set up in very specific ways, and that children really need to be identified so that we can do appropriate interventions for them. So what does that look like? It means making sure that the child has access to people, objects, and activities. And as Tracy mentioned, the disability of deafblindness means that their access to those distant senses is limited or distorted, or in some cases absent. And so how do we think about providing access to their world, to the people and objects and things that are happening? In addition to providing access, that's not enough, right? Accessing information isn't enough. We need to make sure that the activities that they're participating in are meaningful learning activities. All children learn better when they are excited and interested in what they're learning. And that can happen at school through really targeted routines and strategies. It can happen in the community through exciting activities. And it can happen at home, again, through routines when families are supported to understand how their child learns best. All of that has to happen within trusted relationships. And I was thinking, as Tracy was showing those images of all of those children, the faces of our deafblind children, those are trusted relationships. When you need to be in close contact with a student, they need to trust you. They need to be surrounded by adults and caregivers that they know are involved with them and really want to be attuned to them. Part of building that trusting relationship and providing all of this other information is making sure that that child has a way to communicate. So that's going to be very individualized for each child. What does their system look like? For some children, it might be verbal language. Some children might use an NEC device. Some might be signers. Some might use a combination of all of those things. So we really want to be thinking about not just access and activities, but communication. None of that happens in isolation. We get at a lot of that through appropriate assessments. And again, when we can identify a student's needs and their strengths, we can really think about how best to support them in all of their environments. That's a lot of things to think about, and it's not something that one person can do. And so that's why we really support strongly a team approach. We work really collaboratively with existing teams and making sure that they have the support and information they need, and that that team includes the family. So what kinds of things do we need to consider in order to provide all of that really rich foundation for learning? Well, one of the important things to think about is how exactly is this child's disability impacting them? So do we know their type and degree of hearing loss? Do they have a preferred method of communication, and are people using it? And if they don't have one, are people thinking about communication for them? Do they use any type of amplification? So hearing aids, BAHAs, cochlear implants. And as we're thinking all of those things, the reason we do that, it's not enough just to know the information. We want to think about the impact of background noise, for example, for children. We want to think about making sure that people that are interacting with that child are facing them, and that they're not talking with their hands in front of their mouth, because that can be really difficult for children. And you'll hear this throughout the presentation today. Fatigue is a huge issue for our kids, huge. Some of that might be physical because they may have some complex health needs. A lot of it is because our kids work extra hard at processing sensory information. So they may need frequent breaks that their sighted and hearing peers don't. And that's okay. We can work with that. In addition to the hearing loss considerations, of course, we also want to consider the impact of any visual impairment that they may have. Do they have a specific type and degree of vision loss? Measuring this in really young children or complex children can be difficult, but as much as possible, gathering that information helps to inform where that child might learn best with visual information if they have any access to that. If the child's been identified as having low vision or being legally blind, or having total blindness or some light perception, all of those are really important for long-term skills, but they're also really important for families in terms of access to certain kinds of benefits. And so getting those pieces of information can be really helpful for families. Also understanding if your child's needs are variable or progressive over time, again, accessing resources over time, and the presence of additional disabilities. Tracy mentioned earlier those brain-based conditions, so I'm just going to be quick about this, but cortical visual impairment is really one of the most common causes of vision loss in the United States. It's a brain-based condition, so some of these children may have had early ophthalmology visits and been told, you know, your eyes are normal, very typical, but that doesn't mean they're able to process or interpret what information their eyes are taking in. And similarly, children who have neurological brain-based conditions around auditory information, either through disruption of nerves or other conditions, can have difficulty processing the information, even though they're getting some of those auditory pieces. So the impact really is around the combination, and that's what makes deafblindness a unique disability. Because if you think about the strategies we use for children who have a visual impairment, we're often thinking about lots of listening skills and lots of auditory skills. And when we think about children with hearing loss, we're often thinking about lots of visual strategies. These children need a lot of integrated strategies. And so things that can be impacted are things like bonding and attachment, both with primary caregivers and as they develop over time with peers and adults that they work with in the environment. They might have a lot of missing, inconsistent, or distorted information. I think this is key, especially when children have some functional use of vision and hearing, to understand that they don't have complete access to those pieces of information, which often has a major impact on communication and access to language. We already talked a lot about fatigue and sustaining attention. Sometimes that gets perceived out in the wider world as behavior. And so we want to be mindful of, you know, is this a difficulty because this student's been trying to pay attention all day and at the end of the day, they're kind of falling apart? Children who have a combined sensory loss may often have issues with mobility and independent exploration and movement. Even those kids who are fairly mobile might have difficulty in new environments, so being mindful of that. And then just a difference in how everyday activities are experienced. Those pictures that Tracy showed earlier with the beach and the boats, they might have a wonderful day at the beach, but they're going to experience that in different ways. And different isn't negative, but we want to be thinking about how can we make that beach experience meaningful to them in the same way so that they have all of the joy and experience of that. So what are we talking about when we say, oh, these children learn differently than other sighted and hearing peers? Well, I like to think of it sort of as an upside down triangle. So typically babies come into the world and they start looking around and they're listening, and all of their learning in those very early years is happening incidentally. We don't really sit down and teach babies. They just sort of absorb things around us. That's incidental. It happens without them thinking about it, without effort. They go to school and then maybe they listen to a teacher or a parent giving them some instructions and they learn a little bit more. And then they have some hands-on direct experience with all of that to put all the pieces together. And that sort of happens in a really natural kind of a way. For deafblind learners, basically the inverse is true. So that incidental learning isn't something they can access, or at least not in a way that's complete. So they might be hearing pieces of conversations when they're very young. They might see portions of things, but they don't have that whole picture. Being able to sit in a classroom and just listen and follow along with some teaching might be a really difficult experience for them if there are no supports in place. So what they really need is that direct instruction, hands-on experiences, somebody supporting them in proximity to have access to the things that they're missing throughout their environment so that they can become better learners and have access to more of the concepts that their peers have as well. So part of the work that we do when we're working with teams and families is talking about what does all of that look like when we bring it together. So we have all of these things we're thinking about for these children. What do we do with it? So we want to think about the environment, and that's around access and information. We want to think about providing predictability and consistency for children. And we want to think about communication, and that's their communication and our communication. So we can go into that a little more in depth in the next slide. So what might that look like? For some children who have residual vision and hearing, we might want to think about reducing clutter, visual and auditory. We maybe are thinking about contrast and highlighting. Maybe we're thinking about consistent setup in the room. We're going to think about routines. Lots of us have routines in our daily lives. I always say routines benefit everybody. You know, I get up in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, I eat the same breakfast, and then I get started with my day. It helps me prepare and it helps me anticipate what's coming next. And then communication. Behavior is communication, all kinds of behavior. What we want is to help children shape that behavior in whatever way we can to be intentional and communicative. And even children with very complex needs are communicating with us. And it's our job to really figure out how, and to also figure out how we can help them understand our own communication to them. So Helene's going to take it from here and dive into some more specifics around how exactly we might do some of these things. Take it, Helene.
Thank you, Brenda. So going to take some of those considerations just mentioned and dive a little bit deeper, as Brenda said. The first one being modifying the environment. And this is a great picture because it shows how to minimize clutter by covering the cubbies or shelving. And you can do this in your home or in your classroom. And it helps reduce some of the visual clutter. You also might add some highlighted yellow tape to stairs to make them more visually accessible to students. You might take some colored tape and put it around bins that your child's toys are placed in to help outline those and make them more visually accessible. But there are a whole host of modifications for the environment that you can use, and we recommend consulting with your TVI or teacher of the visually impaired and TOD or teacher of the deaf about these modifications and how best to adapt materials for your specific child or student. Use of touch is very important for students with deafblindness because for them, the hands are the eyes and the ears. So we highly recommend using hand under hand as a way to guide students to learn. And with hand under hand, it's when the provider is placing their hand under the hand of the learner, which is in direct contrast to what many of us have learned in school, where we were taught to help provide guidance hand over hand by kind of gently guiding someone's student. We actually want to do the opposite of this when we're working with students with deafblindness, gently sticking our hand under the student's hand, and it becomes more of an invitation to engage with the objects or activities in front of them. We also want to be thinking about touch cues as a way to prevent a student from startling. It's a way to get their attention gently and let them know what's going to happen next. So this could look like a gentle tap on the forearm to say that you're about to give them some information. It could look like taking a spoon during feeding time and tapping it close to the mouth to indicate that some food is about to come. Joint tactile attention is another important consideration, and it refers to looking at the same object together. We want to be exploring the world together with our child or student, and this should be established as an ongoing part of the relationship. Here's an example of joint attention where a mother is exploring a teddy bear with her child and reaching out and feeling it. And then the child is invited to feel it with them. And then the mother might include the sign for bear to start to develop concepts. Personal identifiers is a great example in the picture here. It might be something that you wear and that you're going to present to the child or student that you're working with to let them know that it's you that is there to work with them. A lot of our students and children work with a great number of providers, right? We can have these kind of really big teams. And so we want to help the child learn to distinguish and come to anticipate that, oh, like I see here, it's Linda, right? Linda OT is here to work with me versus Pam PT is here to work with me, and establish that relationship connection over time. So oftentimes we use a tactile name symbol in conjunction with this physical personal identifier. It can also look like a kind of a homemade type of bracelet that you can have on your hand. It does not need to be anything fancy. It can be a little piece of rope. It can be your ponytail holder, right? The good old scrunchie that's there. So lots of different personal identifiers. And some students learn to identify people by their jewelry. So you might have a favorite ring that you wear every single day. And when you go to greet the student with your hand, they feel that ring and begin to associate that with you. Or it could be your personal bracelet that you wear, or your watch that might be distinct from others. Developing literacy skills is another consideration. We can do this through our everyday routines. Literacy includes, very importantly, actually talking about a student's schedule in the day. And we're going to go into that a little bit more detail in another slide, but you might be looking at the objects that represent things that are to come in the day. We want to create accessible literacy environments. So that could look like using page fluffers. So that's a little bit more easy for the student to manipulate the pages. It could look like using audiobooks so that they're more accessible. Maybe you're using a CVI friendly book that is digital on the computer. We want to engage in shared reading and offer students opportunities to participate in that, whether we're telling them, inviting them to read in their head, whether they might have a switch that they're hitting to say a repeated line in a book. Experience books are really a very fun way for families to engage with their child in literacy, because you're taking a fun thing that you've done together. I'm thinking about Tracy's beach picture. So if you've had that beach day and you've collected some shells while you were there, you can take those and glue them into just some pages. It does not need to be fancy at all. Just take some paper that you have at home, glue or tape a shell onto that. And now you can have that to refer back to and say, remember when you and I went to the beach and we felt the shells, etc. And that leads to more dialogue and conversation, and the conversation can lead to more writing of stories. And so we've got your reading piece and your writing working together, which is always fantastic. So here's the calendar system that I was referring to earlier, and it can look many different ways. The first image on the left, you'll see two baskets. So it's just, this is what's happening right now. And then when it's done, it goes in that yellow all done bin. And in the middle, they're incorporating the use of an AAC device. So it looks like they've got some tactile symbols, and they've got it looks like a 2-week schedule up there. So this person has clearly been working on this skill for a period of time, has built up to multiple weeks. And then the one on the right looks like it might be a schedule for one day and all of the individual items that are happening during that time. As families, you are the expert on your child. So you have all these individuals who may be giving you information and advice and recommendations. And yes, they have some expertise, but you are truly the expert on your child. So as school providers, we really appreciate when parents, guardians are able to give us information about their child that they know best. So we want to know, how does your child perceive the world? How do they use the vision, hearing, touch that they do have to understand the world? Any medical reports you may have. On the next slide, we're going to show an All About Me tool that you can use. NEC has developed a sensory bubble that helps teams think about the best access points through vision, hearing, and touch. And gathering your thoughts through person-centered planning tools such as Reach for the Stars or Charting the Life Course can help us talk about hopes and dreams, things we may be concerned about now and how we're going to solve those problems or issues, and how we're going to plan for a bright future. And here is the All About Me example, which is sometimes also referred to as a one-page profile, and provides information very specific to your child. You can see it talks about favorite things, ways to soothe the child, how they communicate, things they like, don't like. And this tool is particularly useful, not only in an everyday sense, but when you have a substitute. If you're working in if your child is in a childcare setting or school, and you know, it's sometimes people have to be absent. We don't like to do it, but it's so helpful to have information like this at your fingertips so that people can do the very best job they can about meeting your child's needs and understanding them. And then when they transition to the next class or the next school, it's very, very helpful to have this information on hand. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kristen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Helene. My name is Kristen Layton, and I'm going to just spend a few minutes. We want to have lots of time for your questions and any comments, but to give you an idea of how NEC provides services so that each of you knows how you can access NEC services, and then share that with anyone that you know that you think could benefit. So as Tracy mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are federally funded, and being we're federally funded, the federal government tells us exactly how we, what we need to do. So I just want to point out at first that NEC, in some ways, unfortunately, is not a direct service. So we cannot provide direct services to children. We can't be like a regular person who comes in and works with a child. However, there's a lot that we can do, and the way you'll see that that NEC is structured, it's really structured to meet you where you're at, and any family and professional. So we look at this as different tiers of intensity, essentially, of support. So the tier 1 is very much it's almost like open access information. We have information on our website, our social media posts. We have a newsletter. If you're not signed up, please do, because we do, we have some stories, we post information, upcoming events and things like that, and blogs. So that's really information that's just out there for you to access whenever you're ready. And it's for everyone. Tier 2 is our targeted consultation. This is usually around a specific topic. For example, your child might be, you might be at a point where you feel like their communication is, you need to try something new. So you might reach out to us and say, do you have any resources on communication? Do you have any courses available that the team can take to learn more? So it's usually around a specific topic, but it's targeted to the needs of an individual child. So we have a lot of opportunities. I'll talk a little bit about them later. Tier 3 is our intensive consultation. And this is where we're really spending quite a bit of time with the child's educational team, of course, always including the family as part of that team, in really helping to strategize around the child's educational program. This is, ongoing consultation, being able to attend some team meetings, perhaps some in-depth training, and offering our professional development opportunities that are offered to everyone, but we may gear that and help to integrate that into the child's program. So those are our 3 levels of what we call technical assistance that NEC provides. As Tracy mentioned in the beginning as well, I oversee most of the work around transition. And if you notice on, not necessarily Vermont, but in some of our other states, the largest number of children are transition age. And there are many reasons for that. Sometimes people don't reach out to us until that transition age comes, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, what do we do now after the education system stops? So we're focusing a lot of our time and energy on this population. When we talk about transition age youth, we're talking about children who are, typically around 14 to 22. I will mention though, that we work with 12-year-olds and 13-year-old teams around those children that were already starting to think about planning for transition. And also, you know, we don't want to come into a child's life at 22. We'd like to have like the building blocks and be planning all along. We have a lot of information around transition, or a lot around person-centered planning. So that's part of that tier 1, tier 2. As family members and as team members, you can reach out to us at any point. Just today, I was responding to a speech language pathologist who said, you know, we need some new person-centered planning materials. Do you have any? Yes. And, you know, we were able to send those along with some other resources. We also have ongoing consultation, that tier 3 level, to transition teams, where we really try to, you know, we're not leading the transition process, but what we're trying to do is support that process and connecting early on the education team and the family to those adult services. We do work closely with the Helen Keller National Center, and they also provide, they can help bridge the gap for children who are deafblind into adult services. So we have that on-site consultation and training. We're also very excited to this summer to offer pre-ETs, which is essentially transition experiences for young adults who are of transition age, in real life experiences around sampling different employment options, vocational skills, and all of the other skills that are around getting a successful job and keeping it. So we are looking at the pre-ETs program for this summer, and that will be open to children ages 14 and up. And there's a virtual component and an on-site at Perkins School for the Blind. So keep up with us or reach out for more information about that. We're just developing it now, so there's not a lot there's nothing on the website right now specifically, but we'll keep you posted. As I mentioned before, and just this is an example of, with our intensive consultation to transition teams, a lot of what we do is around person-centered planning, helping the team to really look at what the goals are for the student, what the preferences are around work or college or whatever that student is interested in, helping to, you know, give suggestions to the IEP team about how to embed transition goals into the IEP, identifying the gaps between education and adult, and like I mentioned before, the pre-ETs program, you know, letting people know about that and figuring out if the child is, you know, would benefit from this experience over the summer. Here is just a little spattering of some of our current and recent activities. You can find, again, if you sign up for our newsletter, you will not miss a thing, because you'll find out everything that's coming up in enough time to sign up for it. We talked a lot about, so I won't go through all of these. We have the consultation and training to families, all of the online training. I really encourage you to take a look at that too. We have some great courses happening that are facilitated by amazing people that are experts in the field, for paraeducators, interveners, for teachers, for families. We have an 8-week series and foundation of deafblindness, a professional certificate in deafblindness. And I wanted to point out, I think it is in here, the second from the bottom is our DB Winter Seminar. I'm making an extra plug for this. Dr. Susan Bruce from Boston College, if any of you know her, she's amazing. She's one of the most, she's the go-to person around communication for children who are deafblind. She's been doing this her whole career. Plus, she's an excellent presenter and just an amazing person. There's still room to sign up for this. It's 2 sessions, and I couldn't suggest it, you know, more. It's an excellent program. And again, follow our newsletters, blogs, and of course, pointing out all of our family activities, our family connections, our networking events, which I'll mention one specific one on the next slide, and our story time series. Coming up in May, mark your calendars. It is in New Hampshire, but it's just all of our family events are really focused around doing something fun, giving families something interesting and fun to do with the whole family, but also having the opportunity to connect with other families, which we all know is one of the best resources for any family, is just to have other people to talk to. So these are always fun events. They're well attended, and encourage you to reach out if you're interested in that. And with that, I just wanted to say on behalf of the entire team, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited. We got a great turnout today. And please let us know, reach out to any of us about any services that you're interested in, clarification of anything you've heard today, any questions, and we're here for you. So that's really our message today. So thank you. I will turn it back to our wonderful hosts.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. And I just want to thank you. This was an excellent, excellent presentation. We do have a few questions, and people are welcome to unmute if they'd like. One of the questions, which was answered in the chat, the services are free. One question is, how do students connect with Voc Rehab, or in Vermont, we call it Higher Ability? And can you share more about the pre-ET services in collaboration with Voc Rehab? And perhaps you can talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
This is
Sure.
Tracy. I'll take that, just related to
Sure.
teams that I've been working with. What typically we find is the Voc services folks are pulled in during the IEP transition process. And we've seen the VR Higher Ability people attend those particular team meetings. And then Helen Keller National Center, the rep, Christine Telford, has also attended those same team meetings. And she has connected with the Higher Ability folk and offered support around job coaching, ideas around access to the community. So I think between NEC and Helen Keller National Center, we've been able to kind of bridge this process and offer information supports to families, most importantly, because it really is so highly individualized when we talk about the population of kids who are deafblind. And what I've seen, for example, around these two teams and these two students is a really intense focus on the individualized communication program for those students, because they were going from home to community pool, for example. Then they were also going to a job exploration experience at a local grocery store. So thinking about those different environments and all of the different communication supports that were needed for those students really took a lot of planning and individualized support. So that's just one way that we've done it. We do always try and make sure as well that we encourage teams to think about all of the resources in Vermont that are available and are going to support that child upon transition, and get them engaged as early as possible. We use a really simple tool. It's called Who's on the Team. And some people think it's just kind of like this mundane thing we do, but we're constantly asking the question, even at the age of 15 and 16, do we have the key players at the table in this conversation that are going to actually be supporting this young adult upon transition? So that's just one particular area we really try and make sure that we connect those agencies early on.
Great. Thank you very much. And I have one more question. I think it's for Helene. Can you talk a little bit about your experience on the I-Team and how schools are accessing your services? And then I invite our other participants to please put them in the chat or unmute yourself. Thank you.
Sure. So Vermont I-Team serves teams that are supporting students with complex profiles. And the I in I-Team stands for interdisciplinary, which is perhaps the best way to describe what we do. I see my colleague Michelle Streeter is on this call right now. Michelle is the Family Resources Consultant for Vermont I-Team for the Northeast region, and my counterpart here. And so we have educational consultant, family resources consultants, OT consultants, PT consultants, and communication consultants, and a transition consultant that we're going to be connecting more with Kristen for NEC for our transition age students, which we're very excited about. And so the work that we do is really to build the capacity of the school teams, including the families, they're a key part of that team, of course, to support the students with whom they're working. So that could look like training, it could look like instructional plans, developing materials. Some of the roles overlap with some of the things that NEC does, which is why this collaboration works well, because we'll also do some person-centered planning, et cetera. I hope that answers your question. To receive those services they are not free. It is through a contract with the SU for a fee. And if you'd like more information, you can visit the Vermont I-Team website, and there is a link to our online referral system. If you have any more questions, you can use the email that was shown on the last slide of this presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Helene. I see one more question in the chat box. It is, do students, particularly transition age, receive training on using support service providers or co-navigators?
I'll take that one. One of the things I'd like to mention here is just to really make it very clear. We don't provide direct service, so we're not going to be working with the student and training them how to use their SSP. What we're going to do is work with the school team or the adult services receiving that individual once they transition, and strategies that they can use to help support that individual. So use of an SSP requires highly skilled individuals that really can map services to the needs of the student. So we would be working with agencies, not directly with students on how to use an SSP. One thing, though, that we have done in the past around our pre-ETS program is spent a lot of time working with students to coach them of how to use an educational interpreter or an interpreter, because often they look to the interpreter for all direction rather than other individuals within their immediate world they need to engage with, especially in a work environment. Kristen, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, just that, there are, also resources through Helen Keller National Center. I'll just, they do a little bit more around training, specifically around SSPs. So that's just another resource. I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you. I do think there was a pilot in the state of Vermont for SSP providers. I'm on a committee that I recently heard something about, so stay tuned. There may be additional funding on that coming. Are there any other questions? I'm checking the chat. And again, to our participants, you can always reach out to our presenters. I think most of them have provided their contact information. And let's see. Someone's just writing, are you familiar with the Vermont SSP program and do you refer? It's still happening and available to students, is what person wrote. And then someone else said that a family member had SSP. So I think we've just covered that. Okay, well, thank you everyone. And thank you Tracy, Helene, Brenda, and Kristen for this helpful information. This has been fantastic. You will see the link to an evaluation in the chat. Please take a few minutes to complete it so we can make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements. We have many more interesting workshops coming up, and you can find details about those on on the homepage of our website, which is vermontfamilynetwork.org, along with links to previously recorded ones. We have tons of information on our website, and getting connected with us is easy. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you're a parent. We have 2 closed groups, one for all parents with children with disabilities or special health needs, and one for those with adult children. You can also sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, and you can check out our YouTube channel. And all of our webinars are archived, as this one will be. We're here to help, and please contact us by phone or email. I'll also put a plug in for folks asking about transition. We do have a transition toolkit for youth with disabilities, and a link to that can be found on the homepage of Vermont Family Network on the very bottom. It's a very large electronic transition toolkit, and hopefully there'll be information there that can help folks. So again, thanks everyone, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.